evening and welcome to the Fine Print. I'm Aisha Sindhu. We start this bulletin with breaking news. The lower house of the Indian Parliament has passed a bill to ban instant divorce or triple talaq. The bill seeks to criminalise the practice in the Muslim community. The bill will now go to the upper house of Parliament or the Rajya Sabha. Now, some of the key points of the bill are these. The violators can be imprisoned for a term which may extend to up to 3 years. The victims will be allowed to approach the court to seek subsistence allowance for herself and her minor children. She'll also be entitled to seek the custody of her children. The bill, which was approved by the Union Cabinet earlier this month, was prepared in the backdrop of the Supreme Court's verdict earlier this year, which made the practice of triple talaq illegal. Now, triple talaq is already banned in 19 countries, including India's neighbours Bangladesh, Pakistan and Indonesia. Incidentally, Indonesia has the world's largest Muslim population.
Madam, I beg to move for leave to introduce a bill to protect the rights of married Muslim women and to prohibit divorce by pronouncing triple talaq by their husbands and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
Joining me this evening is my colleague, WION's correspondent Molly Gambhir. She's with us for the latest. Molly, good evening. Take us through exactly what transpired in the Lok Sabha.
Well, Aisha, today, as the Union Law Minister termed it, has been a historic day to say the least when it comes to the fight for women empowerment. Remember, the issue of instant divorce or triple talaq has long been debated, not just today, like the Parliament witnessed that heated debate, but across civil society for the last few months and years. It's been a long-drawn battle that Muslim women especially have been engaged in. They had petitioned the Supreme Court earlier, after which the Apex Court had struck down the practice of instant divorce among Muslims as being unconstitutional. Today was the next step when it comes to that long-drawn battle, when India's lower house of Parliament has passed that triple talaq bill. In other words, the bill which seeks to call the practice of triple talaq as unconstitutional, also to abolish that practice, and of course that practice a non-bailable offence, seeks to criminalise the practice of triple talaq, and also calls for imprisonment of 3 years for those indulging in that practice. Important to highlight here, Aisha, the year 2017 has seen 300 cases of triple talaq. 100 of those took place even after the Apex Court had struck down the practice of triple talaq or instant divorce among Muslims as being unconstitutional. So this, of course, is the next step towards implementing that practice of triple talaq being banned across the country. The next step, of course, will be the bill seeing that rather rough journey in the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament, which, of course, will be rough weather for that bill, to say the least, since the opposition, of course, has remained divided on that bill.
Right. I was going to ask you that itself, Molly, because even though the central government has really pushed for banning of triple talaq, it was the one that really led the charge as far as the proceedings in the Supreme Court went as well. And now, of course, this bill being tabled and passed in Lok Sabha. Where exactly does the opposition stand on all of this?
Well, parties like the AIADMK or the Biju Janata Dal, even the Congress, Aisha, have been highlighting several key sticking points or larger concerns that they really have over this bill. For instance, the Congress today, which tried to also seek that amendment during the voting process and sought for a parliamentary panel to review the bill, even though it lost that move in terms of the majority in the Lok Sabha, which the government enjoys, but it has stuck its neck out in terms of its opposition to certain aspects of that bill, which certainly will come up for discussion in the upper house of Parliament as well, particularly over the issue of maintenance, saying that if the family, or rather if the husband is imprisoned, then in terms of allowing for the custody of the children and allowing for the maintenance of the woman in question, so on and so forth. These are the technical grounds on which the Congress party, for instance, has been rather stringent stringent in its opposition against that bill. Overall, of course, we've seen that bill seeing a smooth sail in the lower house thanks to the government's majority in that lower house of parliament.
Right.
The upper house of parliament will be the next big challenge.
Molly Gambhir, thanks very much for those updates, bringing us up to speed on what's going on. We will, of course, continue to track what happens as far as that bill goes. For now, though, we're turning our attention to another one of the big stories, one that WION's really been at the forefront of. Kulbhushan Jadhav's mother and wife were subjected to taunts. These are scenes from December 25th, Christmas Day, when Pakistan had promised India that the media would be kept away from the meeting between Mr. Jadhav, his wife and his mother.
I understand, Deputy High Commissioner, you were accompanying Commander Yadav's wife and his mother. How was the meeting?
So this is after Pakistan promised India that the media would be kept away. The visuals on your screen are of Mr. Jadhav's wife and mother accompanied by the Deputy High Commissioner as they were trying to leave Islamabad. They're being hounded and India is outraged, inflamed by how these two women were treated by Islamabad.
मुलाकात के बाद जो कार श्री जाधव के परिवार और भारतीय राजनयिक को ले जाने के लिए दी गई थी, उसे जानबूझकर रोककर रखा गया ताकि मीडिया को परेशान करने का एक और मौका मिल सके, वो और व्यंग्यात्मक टिप्पणियां कर सकें और तरह-तरह के कटाक्ष करके जाधव की मां और पत्नी को तंग कर सकें।
Now, of course, if you're watching this story in Pakistan, you'd only receive one side of the picture. Luckily for WION, our very own bureau chief, Taha Siddiqui, was in Islamabad. He reported on this story for us. He was at the Foreign Office when this entire media circus went on. He has, of course, brought us back very interesting observations of what went on December 25th. We'll be going across to Taha, who's live with us from Islamabad in just a bit. But before I go any further, India's Minister of External Affairs, Ms. Sushma Swaraj's anger was not without reason. Pakistan backtracked on many of its commitments, but it wasn't just she who was outraged. People within Pakistan's journalist fraternity were embarrassed by the spectacle as well. Among them was WION's Pakistan bureau chief, my colleague Taha Siddiqui. He tweeted his utter disbelief at how his colleagues in Pakistan behaved with Mr. Jadhav's family, calling their accusations the parroting of the establishment's own charges. But how and where did it go so wrong? What was promised to New Delhi by Islamabad? Why did Pakistan's quote-unquote humanitarian gesture devolve into this devious hounding?
When Kulbhushan Jadhav's family visited the Foreign Office, I was a witness to the way the journalists behaved at the entry and exit of the family who were accompanied by the Indian diplomat. Especially when they came out, they started shouting and screaming, not just questions, which is okay because normally questions are a job of a journalist, and in today's TV world, when you interact with someone and you throw questions at them, and even if they don't answer, that can be aired and made a point out of that particular sort of interaction. But this time around, the journalists present over there at the Foreign Office building were not asking questions. They were actually accusing, they were alleging that, Kulbhushan Jadhav's mother, asking her how she felt being a terrorist mother, asking the wife how she felt about being married to someone who has killed hundreds of Pakistanis. And all these are political statements. And to top it off, not just that, while they were exiting, one of the journalists then started to chant "Long live Pakistan" slogans and riled up all the rest of the journalists, and they all joined in the chorus. And when I saw this, it made me feel a bit of sort of disappointed in my own community, in my own journalist community, and I went on to report this the very same day on my channel, but also at the same time talked about it on Twitter online, and the reason for putting it out there was that I want to tell the other side across the border, the Indians, that while there are journalists like that who misbehaved with the family of Kulbhushan Yadav, with the women who may have been meeting Kulbhushan Yadav for the last time, given the fact that he's on death row and can be executed any day. But despite these journalists did not sort of accommodate for them or feel any sympathy towards the women, but still, despite that, there are journalists like me who felt that this was wrong and wanted to put our voice out there and tell the Indian audience and the world and people across the border that not everyone is like that, and there is still some sanity prevailing in Pakistan, and some people who think that this was wrong, and not everybody behaved the way we saw in the news later on. Also, the video surfaced about the heckling, and then the Ministry of External Affairs in India also complained about it. But putting my voice out there, it's my attempt to say that we're not all the same. Taha Siddiqui, WION, Islamabad.
Taha Siddiqui, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief, the only reporter for an Indian channel who was at that meeting between Mr. Jadhav and his family members, is live with me on the broadcast from Islamabad right now. Taha, good evening. First of all, thanks so much for being so candid in your assessment of what went on. Can I ask you, you've run afoul of the establishment in Pakistan on account of your opinion earlier as well. Why did you choose to speak up this time?
Well, basically, Aisha, what I saw when I was present there, it made me feel like, it was my own journalist community, and I work with them, I report alongside with them, and when I saw the way they behaved, it did not feel right, and especially because the people that they were addressing, those were two women who were quite vulnerable in the situation that they were in, and they had just come back meeting with somebody that they might have just met for the last time, perhaps, because we don't know if Kulbhushan is on death row and his execution can happen any day. So in that sense, they were vulnerable on foreign land, and there is just not just reporting standards or ethical standards, but just normal courtesy requires and demands that one should not do that. But when I saw the way they behaved and even at that time, I tried to intervene and try to sort of talk to them, but because they were in such large numbers, they kind of like they were speaking over my voice and would not allow me to speak and stop them from doing what they did. So then I had no other option but to sort of resort to the other options that I have, like, for example, the social media, or writing a piece about it, or talking about it on TV. And also the overall scenario when this happened, I expected that the Pakistani media itself, people sitting in the newsrooms, the editors, people who are in charge of these reporters, they will tell them that, this kind of behavior was not called for. But instead, later on when I went back to home and I saw the coverage on Pakistani news channels, the nat sound for these questions that were hurled were sort of, presented as questions that they avoided, rather than the very fact that they were actually not questions, they were accusations, and they were allegations, and that kind of behavior was not expected of journalists. But despite that, the Pakistani media again sort of mentioned it and tried to set up this narrative. Right. So it was very important for me to come out and explain this, especially to the to people across border in India, because there is a certain perception that has gone after this, that even Pakistani journalists misbehave, and we're not all like that. Yes, a lot of them that day did behave like that, but I stood out, and then a couple of other friends, also journalist friends, came up to me and said that I was right in doing and saying what I did.
Taha, you said that you were surprised that the editors who were sitting in these newsrooms really didn't rein in these rogue reporters who hurled these accusations at two women, as you rightly pointed out, who were already in an uncomfortable situation in a country that was not their own, for a meeting that had come after 22 long months. Do you think the directive for this behavior perhaps came from somewhere else?
Well, Aisha, that's speculative at best to sort of, talk about that. But what I did see is that, just before the family came out, one of the Foreign Office officials came right in front of me and assured the journalists that there will be an interaction between the family and the people and the journalists present there. Now, I was of the understanding, from what I knew from the Indian embassy side and from the Indian government side, that they were not allowing for any media interaction. So while this Foreign Office official was saying that media interaction will be allowed, I was a little surprised as to how they will make it possible. And then that happened, which, the Ministry of External Affairs Minister also from India has also mentioned that the car was delayed, the vehicle that they were supposed to carry in was delayed, and then there was this opportunity that was created for the journalists to sort of, raise that hue and cry and those sort of screams and shouts that they did. So definitely an opportunity was created for them that, to my eye, I saw that opportunity being created. Then also at the same time, the very fact that these very journalists that are, my colleagues in the field, but disappointing indeed, but, most of them take this sort of line and follow this narrative, which is not independent, and given the fact that, how the Pakistani media industry works and the pressure it has from, certain quarters. And when it comes to the story of Kulbhushan Yadav, I mean, definitely, there's a Pakistani version, which we keep reporting. Then there is the Indian version of it, which we also report and talk about both sides of the versions of the story. And, even after the Ministry of External Affairs came out with its criticism, when the Pakistan Foreign Office responded with it, we covered both sides. But in Pakistan, there's only one side of coverage and one side of news coming out. And these journalists fall in that sort of box and that kind of, they peddle that narrative owing to pressures and owing to sort of, the limitations they work under. And perhaps at times, not just that, I mean, there was no need for one of the journalists to go ahead and actually chant slogans of, Pakistan Zindabad, like long live Pakistan,
right.
Which was sort of, it's kind of the lack of training and professionalism that I felt. And that comes only when, when the industry is sort of controlled in a way it is controlled in Pakistan.
Right. Stay with me, Taha, because all in all, the outcome has simply been this for a number of people viewing in India, because Pakistan, it seems from Taha's assessment too, the establishment was in cahoots with the media gathered there. What we saw in Islamabad before and after Mr. Jadav's mother and wife met him after 22 long months was an orchestrated performance. How else do you explain the Foreign Office of a country often at loggerheads with its own press, congratulating it for its coverage of the meeting? For those of you who missed out on what the Foreign Office said, here's the message in its own words. Quote, extremely glad to have worked with a team of responsible media. Very much thankful for cooperation and tolerance from all of you today. Hats off to a great teamwork on both sides, and you may all see the result. Our media has made Dr. Faisal trending on Twitter. Let's keep this mutual coordination and respect for all the times and events to come. End quote. But congratulations for what? Taunting a mother and a wife, hurling loaded questions at them, disregarding their emotions, making unverified allegations against Mr. Jadav, being indifferent to their emotional state, considering they were travelling from India to Pakistan to understand how exactly their husband, their son had been treated in the 22 long months that he'd been away from home. The media wasn't kept away alone. The Indian diplomat, Mr. J.P. Singh, the Deputy High Commissioner of India, was separated from Mr. Jadav's family as well. Jadav's wife and mother were made to change their clothes. Their bindis, bangles and Mangal Sutras were confiscated. In fact, Mrs. Jadav, or Mr. Jadav's wife, I should say, her shoes were also seized. Now, that has really been the outcome of this PR stunt, as it's being dubbed in a lot of circles in India, at least since this entire episode happened on December 25th. Let me go back to Taha Siddiqui for one more quick question. Taha, there was A press conference held by the DG of the ISPR today as well. There were questions that were raised about Mr. Jadhav. All in all, what was the main takeaway as far as the military's viewpoint on Mr. Jadhav goes? What exactly was said, and were any questions raised about everything that was said in India's parliament today about the treatment meted out to Mr. Jadhav's wife and mother?
Well, to begin with, the ISPR DG repeated and reiterated what we had already heard from the Foreign Office. But he added one thing more, which basically, was a message that we got privately from the Foreign Office. But today, he went on to say that on 25th of December, which was the day when the family came, he thanked the Pakistani media for not, covering the version of what India had to say about it. So that was one thing that particularly stood out and showed that sort of, comfortable and close relationship the media and the establishment enjoy. And in that sense, we saw that, the ISPR thanking the media, saying that they did a good job in the sense that, they did not cover the Indian side of how things went, even though, some newspapers have covered it. For example, one of the Pakistan's leading newspapers, Dawn, talked about the whole issue. But then again, Dawn is in trouble with the military establishment also in the country because of this sort of, independent reporting. But other than that, the ISPR mostly talked about what we'd already heard. And,
right.
Also there was a question that was raised about whether or not the meeting with Kulbhushan Yadav was done after there was international pressure or pressure because of the ICJ, because, India went to ICJ, and upon which, the general responded saying that there was no pressure at all on Pakistan.
Right. And
this meet was done on humanitarian grounds. And then there's the same back and forth of the same sort of things that we've already heard from the Foreign Office.
All right. Taha, thanks very much for joining us this evening, also for the reportage that you've done in Islamabad on this story. I suppose the big takeaway in all of this is this. The meeting between Mr. Jadhav and his wife was little more than a PR stunt. It was a sham, it was manipulative and unbecoming. The emotions of Mr. Jadhav's wife and mother were manipulated, also all so that Pakistan could prove its humanitarian side. Unfortunately for Islamabad, the stunt backfired. It stands exposed, it stands unmasked. We're staying with Pakistan because its terrorism in India has a long history going back to the 1980s and continuing till at least 1995 when Pakistan supported an armed Khalistani terrorists, and then in Kashmir beginning in 1993 to date, all told 36 years and countless lives lost. Given that, it's a wonder why India did not pay Pakistan back in the same coin, perhaps in Balochistan, which Geo News once described as Pakistan's Kashmir. Recall also National Security Advisor Ajit Doval's comments in January 2015. He said, quote, Balochistan is Pakistan's biggest province with less than 10% of its population. It is also the richest in terms of resources with around 105 trillion cubic feet of shale oil and natural gas reserves. Add to that 9 billion barrels of oil. These are estimates of the US Energy Information Administration. End quote. There's more. Balochistan will be the recipient of investment as part of the $50 billion China-Pakistan economic corridor. The Gwadar port sits at the mouth of the Gulf of Oman and Straits of Hormuz. It is a strategic link in China's plan to secure the flow of its energy supplies. From Gwadar, pipelines will move oil and gas all the way to China. Gwadar will be a naval base where Chinese Marines may be positioned. In the Las Bela district, China plans to build a space port to launch its satellites as well.